Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches. Today I'm going to be talking about the 1970 historical epic Cromwell, which depicts somewhat the career of Oliver Cromwell as a parliamentary leader during the English Civil War of the 1640s. Now, given that Oliver Cromwell is a divisive and controversial historical figure, I want to preface the next section of this video with a very clear disclaimer. What I'm doing now is a synopsis of the movie, not a historical account of what actually happened. Okay, as the film, not history, begins, Oliver Cromwell is considering leaving England for the new colonies across the Atlantic. As a former Member of Parliament, which has not been summoned by King Charles for over a decade, and a devout Puritan at odds with the King's love of religious pomp, the country squire believes that a fresh start is needed, though he angrily denies the suggestion that this might involve taking up arms against the king. Cromwell's plans change when the monarch, who is desperate for money to raise an army against the Scots, reluctantly summons Parliament. The law allows that new taxes can only be approved by this legislative body, and, aware of the power this gives them, the members of Parliament demand concessions from the king for their financial aid. With the king determined to give nothing to Parliament until he has the money he wants, and Parliament determined to give the king no money until he meets their conditions, tensions quickly escalate. They culminate in the king's attempt to arrest 5 members of Parliament, including Cromwell, on charges of treason. 4 of the MPs flee before the king arrives. Cromwell remains, facing down the king with the possibility of open war if he proceeds with the arrest of a member of Parliament. The gambit works, but war is inevitable now, and soon the country is racked by conflict. Parliament's army proves ineffective in the early battles, with its discipline poor and its leadership half-hearted. Determined that, now war has happened, it must be won, Cromwell raises and trains a new, much more professional force and leads them to triumph over a much larger royalist force in the Battle of Naseby. But as the royalist military cause founders and Parliament moves into the ascendancy, new troubles arise. Once the war is over, what will the nation look like, and how can peace actually be secured? So writer-director Ken Hughes first began work on this project in 1960, writing his original script the following year. Actor Richard Harris liked the script and wanted to star, but was not considered a big enough name by the financiers. When efforts to secure Charlton Heston failed, the project lapsed. It was revived again in 1967 with a new director and a rewritten script, but finances again fell through. Following this, Hughes returned as both writer and director, and Richard Harris, who was now a much higher profile star, finally got his chance to portray the famous commander and statesman. After that long germination, the film, when it finally was released, suffered a poor critical reception, but it performed strongly at the UK box office. So, why the discrepancy between critical and commercial response? Well, let's start with the reason that I think it worked for audiences, which is that it is a film that oozes visual style and thespian class. On the visual front, the film has well-designed and generally convincing sets, solidly staged battle scenes, and sumptuous costumes. The last in particular is a real feature of the film, as demonstrated by the fact that it won the Academy Award for costume design. Of course, all the visual glitz in the world might not save the movie if it didn't excel in other ways as well. But fortunately for both the film itself and for us, the audience, it enjoys the huge advantage of featuring a very talented cast of actors. This includes Richard Harris, who imbues Cromwell with a sense of weary but iron-willed purpose, even if he does speechify a little bit too much. And it also includes a very young Timothy Dalton as the dashing Prince Rupert of the Rhine. Most importantly, however, it includes Alec Guinness, who lives up to the famous acronym of his name by showing genuine class throughout the movie in his role as King Charles I. He gives the role both grace and dignity, probably more of both than Charles I actually possessed. He was notoriously proud, intransigent, and utterly convinced of his divine right to rule. But, Alec Guinness, he's amazing. And by making Charles I at least a somewhat sympathetic character was, I think, vital to the film to give it any sense of balance, because, frankly, the film is in pretty much every other respect an entirely one-sided celebration of Oliver Cromwell, an effusive, outright hagiography that presents Cromwell as a man entirely driven by deeply held principles. He returns to Parliament to protect the rights of the people, protects the rights of Parliament as the voice of the people against the tyranny of Charles, and takes each step towards his own eventual personal rule of the country only when he has been too deeply betrayed to put his trust in others. Said personal rule, the film then assures us, made England a great power and left the country fundamentally changed even after the restoration of the monarchy. The fact that such personal one-man rule was exactly what drove Parliament to war with Charles I is acknowledged, but the film's thesis seems to be, oh, well, it's okay if the guy in charge is good at it. The thing is, as I noted earlier, Cromwell is a divisive and controversial figure. For instance, some believe his rise was simply a cynical quest for power and not driven by principle at all. And then there's the fact that while England did enjoy military success under his rule, this does not automatically mean that those wars were noble in intent or execution. The reconquest of Ireland, for instance, much of which Cromwell personally led, saw multiple instances of brutality that were unusual even by the standards of that time, and the post-war settlement that Cromwell imposed has been characterised as ethnic cleansing, since it sought to drive all Irish Catholics out of the eastern part of the country. So, if you do watch this film, keep the complexities and controversies of real history in mind. Things are not as simple as this movie would have you believe. And in fact, many of the things that this film would have you believe simply didn't happen. The publicity for Cromwell boasted that it had been made after 10 years of research, but much as with similar claims from the makers of 2004's terrible King Arthur film, these boasts should not be taken seriously. In fact, one of the main reasons for Cromwell's poor critical reception was its historical inaccuracies and inventions. Now, many of these inaccuracies and inventions have been included to serve the film's heroic vision of Oliver Cromwell. Some of the major points include the fact that Cromwell was not one of the 5 MPs who the king tried to arrest, and he did not beard the king in Parliament. Nor did he found Parliament's much more effective new model army, though he was one of its commanders. While he was at the Battle of Naseby, he was the second in command, not the leader, and despite the film's claims, he was not outnumbered in this battle. In fact, the opposite was true. The parliamentary forces significantly outnumbered the royalist army. Their victory was expected in that circumstance. The film also ignores the earlier and perhaps more crucial Battle of Marston Moor, presumably because there the parliamentary forces were led by the Earl of Manchester, who the film has set out to depict as pompous, venal, corrupt and incompetent. So we can't have that guy winning a battle, even if that's what actually happened. There are also other inventions, presumably for the purposes of a cleaner story. Key among these is that the film has Sir Edward Hyde deliver evidence against Charles I during the King's trial by Parliament. In truth, Hyde was not even in England at the time. He was in exile with the King's eldest son, the future Charles II. Now, historical invention and accuracy does not automatically make a film a bad movie, and overall I found Cromwell an entertaining watch. But if you do sit down to watch it, remember, it's entertainment, and first and foremost, and history, barely at all. Next time, the Chilean action comedy Bring Me the Head of the Machine Gun Woman, which is a lot of title for what is actually a pretty short movie. It only runs 72 minutes. But that is next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you've seen Cromwell, let me know what you thought of it.